He had fought 1,000 battles, on screen, in the ring, and within himself. But nothing prepared him for the silence of the Sistine Chapel. Sylvester Stallone stood in the center of St. Peter's Square, arms crossed, lips pressed into a firm line. The air was still, almost reverent, as if the very stones beneath his feet were waiting to breathe. Tourists whispered and shuffled around him, but their presence barely registered. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to feel something he couldn't name yet. To his left, Jennifer adjusted her scarf gently against the early autumn breeze. Her eyes scanned the great dome overhead, not with awe, but with quiet familiarity. This wasn't just another stop on a European tour. She had pushed for this, booked it, insisted, and he had relented. But this wasn't like a red carpet event, where the noise drowned out any real thought. Here, even the footsteps of the guards felt sacred. Therefore, Stallone felt the weight of his own breath, something that hadn't happened since his mother's funeral. He tilted his head back to admire the towering architecture, only to be struck by the mural of the Last Judgment. The brushstrokes stared back. Judgment. That word echoed. He scoffed quietly, hands in his pockets now. Been judged my whole life. What's one more set of eyes? He muttered. They were led through marble corridors that shimmered in filtered light, Jennifer walking slightly ahead, occasionally glancing back at him. Not out of concern, out of instinct. She had learned, over decades, that his silence meant more than his words. He admired her poise, always had. Even when the world called him indestructible, she knew better. Knew that behind the muscle was a man made of cracked memories and unsent letters. And lately, he'd become even quieter. Not out of anger, but exhaustion. You think it's strange? He asked finally. Jennifer turned. What? Me, here, walking into the Vatican. She gave him that half smile, the one that said, I know you better than you know yourself. I think it's exactly where you need to be. Inside the Apostolic Palace, the mood shifted. There were no crowds here, only polished floors, high ceilings, and the kind of silence that made your thoughts scream louder. They were escorted into a side chamber for the scheduled meeting. The guard whispered something in Italian. Sua Santità arriverà presto. The Pope would arrive shortly. Stallone looked at Jennifer. You nervous? Are you? Nah. A pause. Just feels like something's coming. And I don't know what. He paced the room, eyes grazing over ancient books and statues. One in particular caught his eye, a sculpture of St. Peter clutching a key. The expression on Peter's face wasn't heroic. It was uncertain, almost ashamed, like a man who'd failed and knew it. Therefore, Stallone found himself fixating on it. Jennifer approached. What are you thinking? That maybe strength isn't what I thought it was. She didn't reply. She just rested her hand over his. Flashback. A memory. Triggered. They were in their old house in Miami. It was late. Jennifer had found him sitting in the dark, replaying one of his early films, not watching the action, watching the moments in between. You okay? He didn't answer. She walked over, knelt in front of him. What are you looking for? I think, he whispered, I'm trying to remember why I started all this. Back to Vatican. Present. The door opened. The man who entered was not in golden robes. He wore white, simple. His gait was slow but sure, his eyes piercing yet warm. Pope Francis. He smiled, extended his hand. Mr. Stallone, welcome. Stallone stepped forward, gripped his hand. It's an honor, Your Holiness. No, my son, the honor is mine. I grew up watching your films. Stallone blinked. Smirked. Seriously? Francis chuckled. Even priests need stories of resilience. Jennifer stepped forward, greeted him with grace. They exchanged brief words before the Pope motioned for them to sit. You have portrayed many fighters in your life, the Pope began. But tell me, Mr. Stallone, What is the hardest thing you've ever had to fight? Stallone leaned back. The words didn't come quickly. He looked at Jennifer, then back at the Pope. Myself, he said finally. Always myself. The Pope nodded. That is the most honest answer I've heard in years. A bell rang softly outside. The echo of it filtered through the stone walls like a gentle warning that time was passing. And do you think you're winning that fight? Francis asked. Stallone's voice cracked slightly. Some days I do. Other days I think I'm just surviving it. Francis smiled. Sometimes, surviving is the most sacred form of fighting. Just before they stood to leave, the Pope turned to Jennifer. May I say something to your husband? Of course. Francis leaned toward Stallone and said in a low voice, You think your hands were made to throw punches. But what if they were made to lift others up? Stallone froze. The image of St. Peter holding the key returned to him. The shame, the surrender, and the grace that followed. Jennifer sat quietly in the corner of the hotel suite, her fingers tracing the rim of a porcelain teacup. Rome buzzed faintly beyond the balcony window, but inside the room, it was Stallone who filled the silence, pacing, thoughtful, different. The meeting with the Pope had ended over an hour ago, but the words still hung in the air like incense in a cathedral. You think your hands were made to throw punches, but what if they were made to lift others up? He hadn't spoken much since, and Jennifer knew better than to push. Instead, she watched, observed, as she always had. Her role in his life had never been loud, but it had always been steady. He finally sat across from her, eyes distant. You know what's funny? He said. Tell me. All these years I thought the world needed me strong, needed me tough, unbreakable, but that man looked at me like I was allowed to be something else. Jennifer smiled. Maybe he saw what I've been seeing all along. He spoke then of something he rarely shared. Of the moments at night when the lights dimmed and the applause faded, and he was left alone with his regrets. The film roles he took to escape grief, the speeches he never gave, the moments he felt like a fraud. I don't pray, Jen. I don't even know how, he said. She leaned forward. You don't need perfect words, just a willing heart. They took a walk that afternoon, away from the tourist routes, through narrow alleyways that smelled of bread, earth, and faint echoes of centuries past. They entered a small chapel, hidden between apartment buildings. No tourists, no cameras, just flickering candles and time-worn pews. Stallone hesitated at the door. What if I don't belong here? Jennifer didn't answer. She stepped forward and lit a candle, then turned. Come sit with me. And he did. They sat in silence first, then in whispers. When did you start believing again? He asked. She smiled gently. I never stopped. I just didn't push it on you. Because I knew someday you'd feel the silence too. And what if I'm too late? She shook her head. Sly. Grace doesn't have an expiration date. That night, back in the hotel, Stallone opened a notebook, one he always carried but rarely used. He began to write. Not a script, not a monologue, a letter. To no one in particular, to everyone. To God, maybe. He wrote about fighting, about fear, about his mother's faith, about the things he saw in his daughter's eyes that he couldn't put into words. And when he finished, he didn't read it. He simply tore the page out, folded it once, and tucked it in his jacket pocket. The next morning they received an unexpected note. The Pope had asked for a second, private audience. Just Stallone. Jennifer watched as he read the message. He looked up, confused. Why me? She touched his chest. Because something opened yesterday. And maybe he saw it. This time, no press. No escorts. Just a quiet walk through the inner gardens of the Vatican. Pope Francis greeted him with a warm smile. Walk with me. They strolled beneath cypress trees. Silence stretched comfortably between them. Then the Pope said, "Do you know what I saw in your eyes yesterday?" Stallone looked away. "Fear?" "No," Francis replied. "I saw someone tired of pretending." Stallone's throat tightened. The Pope spoke of the illusion of permanence, of the trap of legacy. The world tells us to be unforgettable, but heaven tells us to be faithful. They paused before a statue of St. Paul. "You're not just a symbol of strength," Francis said. "You are a man, a husband, a soul in motion." And then, very gently, "Is there anything, or anyone, you haven't forgiven yet?" Stallone's face fell. A long silence. "Maybe myself." Before they parted, the Pope pressed something into Stallone's hand. A small, smooth stone. From the Garden of Gethsemane, where Christ knelt alone. Stallone stared at it. "Why give this to me?" "Because even the strongest fall to their knees, and that's when heaven leans in closest." That night, back at the hotel, Stallone sat on the balcony alone, the stone in one hand, the folded letter in the other. And for the first time in his adult life, he whispered, "If you're out there, I'm listening." The morning of the charity event arrived with a sky painted in soft gold. Rome had woken up early, bustling with car horns and church bells. But inside Stallone's suite, the mood was still, like something sacred was about to be disturbed. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his jacket. Not a tuxedo, not a costume. Just a black suit with a crisp white shirt. Clean, uncomplicated. But his reflection looked different now. Not tougher, not older. Just softer. Jennifer stepped out of the bathroom, pearl earrings in hand. "You look like a man about to give a speech at his own funeral," she said with a smile. Stallone chuckled. "In some ways, maybe I am." Held in the courtyard of the Vatican museums, the event gathered artists, diplomats, clergy, and a select few invited guests. Stallone was asked to speak, not about his career, not about Hollywood, but about hope. He wasn't ready, but something inside told him to try anyway. Therefore, he scribbled a few words on a napkin, tucked it into his pocket, and walked out into the night. Jennifer squeezed his hand before they left the room. "Don't read it. Just speak." The lights hit his face like 1,000 questions. The crowd went silent. He took the microphone. "Most of my life, I thought strength meant being silent about pain," he began. "Now I know. Silence can be the heaviest thing a man carries." He paused, looked over at Jennifer. Then toward a group of young men in the audience, orphans supported by a Vatican initiative. "I've played heroes, fighters, survivors, but I've learned that the hardest thing a man can do is let himself be healed." Suddenly, Stallone reached into his jacket, not for the napkin, but for the folded letter, the one from 2 nights before. "I wrote this," he said, voice shaking, thinking no one would ever hear it. And then, in front of everyone, he began to read, "Dear God, I don't know what I'm doing here, not just in Rome, but in life. I fought ghosts in the ring, enemies on screen, and regrets in my chest. I'm tired of pretending, of being the man people think I am. I miss being someone real, someone you could speak to. If you're still out there, I'm listening. Sincerely. A son you haven't heard from in a while." Silence. Stillness. Then someone began to clap, and another, and another. But it wasn't applause for a performance. It was relief, recognition, communion. Backstage, Stallone slumped into a chair. Jennifer knelt in front of him again, just like that night in Miami, decades ago. "You didn't perform," she whispered. "You confessed." He looked down. "I feel exposed." "You feel alive, Sly." He nodded. A tear rolled down, unhidden. He let it fall. They returned to the small chapel from before. No speech this time, no cameras, just two people kneeling, hands clasped. A stone from Gethsemane placed gently on the altar. And then, Jennifer whispered something to him, something he didn't expect. I want to renew our vows, here, in Rome, while we're still strong enough to kneel. He turned to her. A smile broke across his face like dawn. I can't think of a better place, or a better woman. As they stepped out of the chapel, the sun cast long golden beams across the cobblestones. A tour group passed by, unaware. A child dropped a toy soldier by Stallone's feet. He picked it up, smiled at the boy, handed it back, but then paused, looked at it again. A soldier, fallen, lifted. He turned to Jennifer, holding the figure between them. Maybe the Pope was right. About what? She asked. My hands were never made to fight. He placed the soldier gently in her hand. They were made to hold what matters. They stood beneath the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, surrounded by centuries of stone and silence. The light filtered in from above like grace itself, painting soft halos over heads bowed in prayer. But Sylvester Stallone wasn't praying aloud. He was watching Jennifer. She knelt with eyes closed, hands clasped, the same way she'd done since they arrived. Her faith had always been quiet, but relentless, steady, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that saves. And he realized, maybe that's what had saved him too. The ceremony was intimate. No guests, no photographers. Just a priest, an altar, and the two of them. He held her hands with trembling fingers. She smiled through tears. And when he said the words again, decades after the first time, for better or worse, he meant them more now than ever. Because now he understood what worse really meant, and what better could feel like when you no longer needed to prove anything. They shared a quiet meal on a candlelit terrace overlooking cobbled streets. The wine was local, the pasta simple, but the peace? Divine. A young couple nearby recognized him, asked for a photo. He stood, posed, but not as Rocky, not as Rambo, just as a man, a husband, a pilgrim. As they left, Jennifer touched his arm. You looked different just now. How so? Lighter. He nodded. Maybe it's the stone. He pulled the small Gethsemane stone from his jacket, ran his thumb over it. Or maybe I finally put something down. They were invited one last time before leaving Rome, not for a meeting, just a farewell. The Pope greeted them with that same gentle warmth. You've changed, he told Stallone. I've remembered who I was, Stallone answered, and let go of who I was pretending to be. Francis reached into a small drawer and handed him a simple wooden rosary. Not to wear, he said, but to hold when the noise returns. As they turned to leave, Stallone hesitated, then turned back and hugged him. A real hug, the kind that says thank you for seeing me. Jennifer placed a hand on her husband's back, gently guiding him forward. In the quiet of the jet, he stared out the window. Clouds passed slowly, the world below distant. His world, finally still. He pulled out the rosary, wrapping it once around his knuckles, not as a weapon, but as an anchor. Jennifer leaned into his shoulder. He kissed the top of her head. Weeks later, Stallone stood alone on the set of a new film. The crew buzzed around him. Makeup, costume, blocking. But something was different. He walked off the set quietly, found a bench nearby, sat. A young production assistant approached. Mr. Stallone? Everything okay? He looked up, smiled. Just needed a second. He reached into his pocket, not for his phone, but for the folded letter. He unfolded it, read it silently. Then, in the back of that soundstage, he closed his eyes and prayed. He had fought 1,000 battles, on screen, in the ring, and within himself. But nothing prepared him for the silence of the Sistine Chapel, and nothing had ever brought him more peace. Thank you so much for watching. Your time means everything to us. and we hope this story moved you as much as it moved us. If it did, please consider leaving a comment, sharing the video, and subscribing to the channel, because powerful stories deserve to be heard. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never underestimate the impact of one small act of courage.